Hello, Kinders. It's time for some more bedtime stories. Today we're going to start with Parade. This book is by Donald Cruz. Buttons, balloons, and flags for sale. Hot dogs, pretzels, ice cream, and soda to buy. Watchers galore. A crowd waiting. Here it comes. The sign says parade. Flags flying. A strutting drum major leads the marching band. Trombones, clarinets, saxophones. Cornets, trumpets, flutes, French horns, sousaphones. Field drums, cymbals, and last the big bass drums. Here comes a float. And baton twirlers twirling and turning. Bicycles from bygone days and antique automobiles. A cruise ship. And at the end of the parade, the brand new fire engine. Nothing left to see, nothing left to do, except clean up. That's the end of Parade. Our next book is called Don't Be Silly, Mrs. Millie. And this book is by Judy Cox and illustrated by Joe Matthew. Don't be silly, Mrs. Millie. Mrs. Millie, our teacher, is really silly. Every day she says, "Good morning, children. Please hang up your goats." Don't be silly, Mrs. Millie. You mean our coats. At 8 o'clock, our teacher announces, "Please rise for the frog salute." "Oh no," we shout. "You mean the flag salute." It's 9 o'clock, time to write. Miss Millie says, "Get out your paper and penguins." Don't be silly, Mrs. Millie. You mean our paper and pencils. At 10 o'clock, it's recess time. Our teacher looks out the window. "It just stopped raining cats and dogs. Don't step in a poodle." "Don't you mean a puddle?" we ask, giggling. We play outside until our teacher blows her whistle. "Recess is over," she yells. "It's time for chameleon." Don't be silly, Mrs. Millie. Don't you mean it's time to come in? At 11 o'clock, Mrs. Millie says, "You may get drinks, but don't cut in the lion." "You mean the line," we yell. And as we get in line, Mrs. Millie reminds us, "Don't forget your lunch bunny." "Oh, that's right, our lunch money," we shout. Mrs. Millie puts on her glasses to read the menu. "They have gorilla cheese sandwiches today." "Don't be silly, Mrs. Millie. You mean grilled cheese sandwiches." At 1 o'clock, our teacher picks up a book. It's story time. "Come sit on the bug." "You're so silly," we cry. "You mean sit on the rug." At 2 o'clock, Mrs. Millie calls us to the back of the room. It's time for art. "Who wants to paint on the weasel?" "You mean the easel, Mrs. Millie. How can you be so silly?" After art, our teacher asks, "Who's hungry? We have parrot sticks and quackers." "We know what you mean, carrot sticks and crackers," we say. At 3 o'clock, Mrs. Millie smiles. "What a fun day we've had, but it's time to go home. Put on your bats and kittens." "Don't be silly, Mrs. Millie. You mean our hats and mittens." When we're ready to leave, our teacher goes to the door. "Butterfly, children." "No, Mrs. Millie," we shout. "You don't mean butterfly, you mean goodbye." Mrs. Millie laughs. We laugh too. "Butterfly, Mrs. Millie. See you gator." And we wave goodbye as we get on the octopus. So silly. I think they mean the school bus. What a fun book. I like that one. That's my new favorite one, I think. All right, this book is called Giraffes Can't Dance. This book is by Giles Andre and Guy Parker Reese. Giraffes Can't Dance. Gerald was a tall giraffe whose neck was long and slim, but his knees were awfully crooked and his legs were rather thin. He was very good at standing still and munching shoots off trees, but when he tried to run around, he buckled at his knees. Now, every year in Africa, they hold the jungle dance, where every single animal turns up to skip and prance. Jungle dance. And this year, when the days arrived, poor Gerald felt so sad because when it came to dancing, he was really very bad. The warthogs started waltzing, and the rhinos rock and rolled. The lions danced a tango, and the elephant that was elegant and bold. The chimps all did the cha-cha with a very Latin feel, and 8 baboons then teamed up for a splendid Scottish reel. Gerald swallowed bravely as he walked toward the floor, but the lions saw him coming and they soon began to roar. "Hey, look at clumsy Gerald," the animals all sneered. "Giraffes can't dance, you silly fool." Oh, Gerald, you're so weird. Gerald simply froze up. He was rooted to the spot. They're right, he thought. I'm useless. Oh, I feel like such a clot. So he crept off from the dance floor and he started walking home. He'd never felt so sad before, so sad and so alone. Then he found a little clearing and he looked up at the sky. The moon can be so beautiful, he whispered with a sigh. Excuse me, coughed a cricket who'd seen Gerald earlier on, but sometimes when you're different, you just need a different song. Listen to the swaying grass and listen to the trees. To me, the sweetest music is those branches in the breeze. So imagine that the lovely moon is playing just for you. Everything makes music if you really want it to. With that, the cricket smiled and picked up his violin. Then Gerald felt his body do the most amazing thing. His hooves had started shuffling, making circles on the ground. His neck was gently swaying, and his tail was swishing round. He threw his arms out sideways and swung them everywhere. Then he did a backward somersault and leapt up into the air. Gerald felt so wonderful, his mouth was open wide. I'm dancing! Yes, I'm dancing. I am dancing, Gerald cried. Then one by one, each animal who'd been there at the dance arrived while Gerald boogied on and watched him quite entranced. They shouted, "It's a miracle! We must be in a dream. Gerald's the best dancer that we've ever seen." How did you learn to dance like that? Please, Gerald, tell us how. But Gerald simply twirled around and finished with a bow. Then he raised his head and looked up at the moon and the stars above. We can all dance, he said, when we find music that we love. That's right. We are all dancers, aren't we? I will see you tomorrow. I hope you have a wonderful night. I hope you sleep warm and toasty in your beds, and I'll see you next time.